The November rain hammers the kitchen windows of the Ocean View Grand Hotel like 1,000 angry fists. Water streams down the glass in thick, violent rivulets, neon reflections from the wet Miami streets bleeding across the panes in shades of red and blue and sickly yellow. The industrial kitchen is a cathedral of stainless steel and fluorescent brightness, and in the center of it all, a man is on his knees. Nico Russo, 34 years old, 6'2", with shoulders broad enough to carry an empire and eyes the color of storm clouds, kneels on the cold tile floor with his sister's head cradled in his lap. Elena is 17, blind since birth, her dark hair spread across his thighs like spilled ink. Her breathing comes shallow and irregular, a sound like wind through broken glass. Two doctors in white coats stand frozen near the walk-in freezer. They know who he is. Everyone in this hotel knows who he is. Three armed men in tailored black suits stand motionless, their weapons lowered but not holstered, their faces carved from stone. Tony, his left lieutenant, has sweat running down his temple despite the cold. Nino, his right hand for 12 years, has his jaw clenched so tight his face looks like it might shatter. And then she moves. The woman in the stained hotel uniform takes a step forward. Her name is Aria Voss. She is 31 years old but looks like she has lived through centuries. Her hair is dark brown, pulled back in a way that emphasizes the sharp angles of her face, the hollows of her cheeks, the exhaustion that lives permanently in her eyes. She wears the uniform of the hotel's cleaning staff, and there are bruises on her left wrist in the shape of fingers. Her shoes have a hole in the left sole. She has $2 in her pocket and nothing else in the world. She does not know who the girl on the floor is. She does not know that Nico Russo is watching from the shadows near the industrial ovens, his presence like the weight of an invisible blade. She only sees someone defenseless who needs protecting. And Aria Voss, who has been defended by no one since her husband died 3 years ago, cannot walk past suffering and do nothing. You want to hurt a blind girl? Her voice cuts through the tension in the kitchen like a blade wrapped in ice. It trembles, but it does not break. Then you go through me first. The armed men raise their weapons. The sound is sharp and metallic, 3 guns moving in unison. The doctors step backward. Tony's hand tightens on his trigger. Nino's breathing becomes audible, heavy, like a cornered animal. But Aria Voss does not move. She does not speak. She stands there with her hands raised and her eyes locked on the men who are about to kill her, and something in her stillness transforms the entire room. Nico Russo emerges from the shadows. He moves the way gods move in old stories, deliberately, each footstep a measured promise of devastation. His suit is charcoal gray, tailored by a man in Rome who charges $15,000 for a single jacket. His shirt is white and open at the collar, revealing the gold chain he has worn since the night his father died. A scar runs from the outer corner of his left eye to the edge of his jaw, a pale line against darker skin, and it catches the fluorescent light like a fissure in marble. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. Lower your weapons. The guns lower immediately. In 15 years of working for Nico Russo, no man has ever disobeyed a direct command twice. His eyes move from the armed men to Aria Voss, and in that moment, something shifts behind his gaze. Something ancient and broken that he thought had died when his father fell bleeding onto the kitchen tiles of their family restaurant, a blade between his ribs, 12-year-old Nico watching from the pantry. The men feel it. Tony exchanges a look with Nino that neither of them has seen in 15 years. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest. Nico kneels beside his sister again, and Aria watches as this powerful man becomes something else entirely. His hands move gently across Elena's forehead, his voice softens into something that sounds almost like prayer. She is breathing, he says. The ambulance is 2 minutes away. She will survive. Aria realizes then that she has been holding her breath. She releases it slowly, and the sound fills the kitchen like a confession. But what she does not know was that this single act of courage, this moment when she stepped between armed men and a stranger's suffering, would bind her to the most dangerous man in Miami in ways neither of them could escape. She does not know that Nico Russo has spent 20 years building walls around his heart so high that even his own lieutenants have never seen inside. She does not know that her name will soon be written in the ledgers of every crime family in Florida as the woman who saved his sister. She only knows that the ambulance is arriving, that the rain is still falling, and that for the first time in 3 years, she has chosen to be brave instead of invisible. The sirens grow louder, coming closer, cutting through the storm like a scream. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Now, let us go back to the beginning, to understand how a widow with nothing became the woman who would change everything for a man who built his empire on vengeance. The morning breaks grey and cold over Miami. The sun rises somewhere behind the clouds, but it offers no warmth, no light, only the promise of another day of survival. Aria Voss stands in her kitchen, if it can be called that. It is barely more than a corner in a room no larger than a prison cell. The apartment above the laundromat on Northwest 14th Street costs $800 a month, and she is for months behind on the rent. The landlord has stopped knocking. He just leaves notices taped to her door now, the words getting angrier with each passing week. She counts her money on the Formica table for the third time this morning. $2.17. Yesterday it was 18 cents more, but Oliver needed bus fare to get to school, and she had given it to him without hesitation. Her son is 8 years old. He is still young enough to believe that his mother can protect him from anything. She is running out of time to correct that belief. There is 1 egg in the refrigerator. No butter, no milk, no bread. There is instant oatmeal in the cabinet, the cheap kind that tastes like cardboard mixed with sugar, but there is enough for 3 bowls if she portions it carefully. She made a mental note 3 days ago to buy eggs, but when she went to the store, she stood in front of the refrigerated section and did the math again. Milk was on sale for $3.99, and she would use the whole carton before it spoiled. Eggs were $2 a dozen. Every penny counted. The clock on the wall, the one she rescued from a dumpster 2 years ago, reads 6:43. She has to wake Oliver in 7 minutes. He needs to eat before school. His teacher called last week to say that Oliver fell asleep in class, that he had not eaten breakfast. Aria had felt the words like a blade through her heart. She cracks the egg into a small bowl and scrambles it with a fork while Oliver emerges from the bedroom, his hair tangled with sleep, his shirt inside out. He is still in his pajama bottoms. He does not ask about breakfast. He has learned not to ask for things. "Put your uniform on," Aria says, keeping her voice steady and light, the way she does every morning. "The one I washed yesterday." It is hanging on the chair. Oliver moves toward the kitchen table, his eyes still half closed, and stops. He looks at the bowl with the scrambled egg. His face is thin, his cheekbones too prominent for a child so young, the result of skipped meals and stretched budgets and a mother who sometimes goes without eating so there is more for him. "What about you, Mommy?" His voice is small and careful. He has learned to be careful too. "I will eat at the hotel," she lies. "Marcus might let me take some of the food from the dinner rush before he throws it away." Marcus Webb, the hotel's assistant manager, never lets her take anything. He monitors the kitchen like a warden, and twice he has accused her of stealing when she tried to save something for later. Last week, he caught her putting a roll into her pocket from a table she was clearing, and he made her empty her pockets in front of the other staff while he laughed. The humiliation had burned hotter than hunger ever could. Oliver climbs into the chair and eats the egg with a spoon, taking small bites and chewing carefully, the way he has been taught to make things last. Aria watches him from across the table, her own stomach growling, her hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee that is her only breakfast, and she makes a promise to herself that tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow she will find a solution. Tomorrow everything will change. She does not know that tomorrow will bring the rain, and the hotel kitchen, and a blind girl, and a man with storm-gray eyes who can remake the entire world with a single word. She only knows that she has to get Oliver to school and then get to the hotel by 11 o'clock, or Marcus will dock her pay. She has no pay left to dock. She has been working on credit for 3 weeks, relying on the tips that she claims to earn, tips that Marcus steals from her shift by shift. 12 days. That is all the time she has left before the debt collector comes. 12 days before they lose this apartment. 12 days before she and her son become truly homeless, sleeping in their car if the car still runs, or on the street if it does not. Aria touches Oliver's tangled hair, and he looks up at her with eyes that are exactly like his father's eyes. Dark brown, trusting, believing that his mother is stronger than she is, that she can solve this impossible problem. Outside, the rain begins to fall. The rain fell like a blade wrapped in ice, and Aria Voss stood in the blackened skeleton of what used to be her home. November 3rd, 11:41 in the morning. The charred walls of the riverside apartment stretched around her like the ribs of a dead animal. Everything was gone. The sofa where Oliver watched cartoons on Saturday mornings, the kitchen table where she packed his lunch with love she could not afford to show any other way, the bedroom where her husband had held her through the night before the accident, the dresser where she kept the last photograph of the three of them together. All of it. Ash. Smoke. Memory. She held two things in the world. One was a child's drawing, the paper still intact, protected somehow in a plastic sleeve that had melted at the edges but held. Stick figures. Mommy with yellow hair. Daddy with a big smile. Oliver holding both their hands under a crayon sun so bright it had bled through to the back of the paper. Her husband had drawn that with Oliver 3 months before the drunk driver ran the red light on Interstate 95 and took everything except this. The second thing was $2. $1 bill and 4 quarters, wrapped in a piece of tissue in her jacket pocket, tucked against her ribs where the cold could not reach it. $2 was the entire net worth of Aria Voss, age 29, widow, mother of 1. Oliver stood beside her in borrowed clothes from the Red Cross shelter, clothes that swallowed him whole. His SpongeBob pajama pants dragged on the ground, and he wore a sweatshirt so large that his hands disappeared inside the sleeves. His lips were blue from the cold. His dark brown eyes, exact mirrors of his father's eyes, looked up at his mother with a question he was too young to ask. "Can we fix this? Can you make it stop raining? Can we go home?" She could not answer him. She had no answers left. The fire had consumed everything 3 days ago, midnight on November 1st, a faulty wire in the wall that the landlord had ignored for 2 years despite her pleas. She had been at work, the night shift at the Ocean View Grand Hotel, when the call came. The fire department had already put it out. The building was a total loss. Her deposit was gone. Her belongings were gone. Temporary housing would be available in 5 days if she could prove she had been living there, which she could not, because her name was not on the lease. Her ex-landlord, a man named Derek Solis who collected his rent in cash and kept no records, was unreachable. She had learned that particular fact at 2:08 in the morning when she hung up the phone after calling his number 15 times. Oliver had been sleeping at the Red Cross shelter for 3 nights. Aria had been sleeping in her car, a 2009 Honda Civic with 89,000 miles on the odometer, parked in the hotel parking lot between her shifts. She had not changed clothes. She had not showered. She had been living in the same outfit for 72 hours, and the smell of her own body had become something she noticed every time she bent down to pick something up. But the fire was not her worst problem. The fire was simply the final brick in a wall that had been crushing her for 18 months. The debt. The $200,000. Her husband, Daniel Voss, had been a good man. Honest, hard-working, full of laughter that made their small apartment feel like a home despite its poverty. But Daniel had also been a man who believed in second chances, in helping people, in the fundamental goodness of the people around him. This faith had killed him. Not the drunk driver. His own belief. His cousin, a man named Vincent who he had not seen in 12 years, had called Daniel at work asking for help. Vincent was in trouble with people, dangerous people, the kind of people who did not forgive debt. He needed $30,000. He would pay it back, he promised. Give him 6 months. Daniel had believed him. Daniel had gone to a loan shark named Marcus Webb, not the Marcus Webb who would later become the night manager at the Ocean View Grand, but the man's older brother, a criminal who operated out of a pawn shop in Little Haiti, and borrowed $30,000 at an interest rate of 60% per year. The loan shark's math was meticulous. 6 months later, the debt had doubled. 12 months later, it had more than tripled. Daniel went back to borrow more money to pay the growing interest. By the time the drunk driver hit his car on I-95, Daniel owed $75,000 and climbing. That was 18 months ago. The interest had continued to accrue. Aria had tried to pay it. She had worked doubles at the hotel. She had taken cleaning jobs in rich people's homes on her days off, scrubbing their toilets for $15 an hour cash. She had sold her jewelry, her furniture, her wedding ring, even her dead mother's china. She had cut back Oliver's food to cut back the bills. She had eaten one meal a day, then one meal every other day, then simply stopped eating on days when she could not afford to fill both their stomachs. None of it mattered. The debt was a creature that fed on itself, growing fatter the more you tried to starve it. $200,000. 12 days until the final payment came due. 12 days until the men came to collect what could not be paid. The loan shark, not Marcus Webb's brother anymore, he had been arrested 3 years ago on unrelated charges, had been replaced by a management company, a professional operation that handled defaulted debts with mathematical precision. They called her at 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. every single day. They sent her letters printed in red ink. They told her what would happen if she did not pay. They used specific language. They spoke about her organs. They mentioned Oliver by name, which was when Aria had stopped answering the phone and started praying, something she had not done since her mother died. The rain drummed against the broken windows of her former apartment. Aria pulled Oliver closer, and he wrapped his small arms around her waist, burrowing into her jacket like a frightened animal. She could feel his ribs through his sweatshirt. She could feel the tremor in his body from cold and fear and the kind of despair that children absorb from their parents like a sponge absorbs water. "Mommy," Oliver whispered, "can we get a new house?" The question was so simple, so reasonable, so devastatingly impossible, that something inside Aria's chest cracked like thin ice. She pressed her lips against the top of his head and breathed in the smell of the shelter's cheap shampoo, and she made him a promise she did not know how to keep. "Yes, baby. We will get a new house. I promise you." The rain fell harder, and Aria realized that she was crying, that tears were streaming down her face and mixing with the November rain until she could not tell where the storm ended and her own grief began. That night, she left Oliver at the Red Cross shelter in the care of a woman named Sister Margot, a nun with kind eyes who did not ask questions. "I will be back by 8 a.m., Aria told her, though she would not be back by 8 a.m. She would be back by 6 a.m. because Marcus Webb's shift started at 11 p.m. and she needed to be ready. She drove her Honda Civic to the Ocean View Grand Hotel, a 14-story property built in the 1980s and never quite renovated, sitting on South Beach with a view of water that belonged to rich people. The parking lot was full of expensive cars, the kind of cars that cost more than Aria would earn in a decade. She parked her battered Honda in the far corner, under a light that did not work, and changed into her uniform in the back seat. The uniform was a black dress with a white apron, standard server attire, something that marked her instantly as someone who existed to serve other people. The fabric was synthetic and thin. It had been washed so many times that the seams were beginning to separate. She had safety-pinned the hem on one side because the thread had finally given up. At 10:24 p.m., she walked through the employee entrance of the Ocean View Grand Hotel. The kitchen was a symphony of heat and noise and controlled chaos. Prep cooks moved with practiced precision, chopping vegetables, seasoning sauces, plating dishes that would be consumed by people who did not think about where the food came from or who made it. The walk-in freezer hummed its constant drone. The dishwashing station roared. The exhaust hoods pulled smoke and steam toward the ceiling in a never-ending cycle that made the air taste like metal and grease. Aria clocked in and hung her jacket on a hook in the employee area. That was when she saw him. Marcus Webb, the night manager, stood by the pastry station, talking to one of the sous chefs. He was a man in his early 40s with dark hair slicked back from his forehead with so much product that it looked wet. His cologne arrived before he did, a heavy scent that made her sinuses burn. He wore an expensive suit, charcoal grey, tailored, the fabric worth more than everything Aria had owned before the fire, and his watch was gold and probably real and probably cost more than her car. He was handsome in the way that certain men are handsome, with sharp cheekbones and cold eyes and a smile that did not reach those eyes. He had been the night manager at the Ocean View Grand for 8 months, and in those 8 months, he had made it clear that Aria existed for his entertainment. He saw her. His face shifted. The cold smile appeared. "Aria," he called out, loud enough that 3 other people looked up. "You came. I was wondering if you would actually show up or if you would call in sick again. You know what happens if you call in sick, right?" She knew what happened. Shift coverage was her responsibility, and if she could not find someone to cover, her pay was docked. Since Marcus had been stealing her tips, her pay was the only thing keeping her from complete bankruptcy. Last week, when Oliver had the flu, she had called in sick anyway. Marcus had docked her for 5 hours. That was $50. That was half her remaining credit. "I am here," she said quietly. "Good girl," Marcus said. He smiled again, and there was something in his expression that made her skin crawl. "We are busy tonight. I need you on Section C, the private dining area. The chef wants the plating to be perfect. Do not mess this up." Section C was the farthest section from the main dining room, a series of private rooms used by wealthy clients who wanted to conduct business or celebrate occasions without being disturbed by the general public. It was also the farthest section from other staff members, which meant that Marcus could find her there alone. She had learned this over 8 months. She had learned where the cameras did not point. She had learned which times the kitchen was most crowded so that no one would miss her if she needed to hide. She had learned to keep her hair pulled back so Marcus could not grab it. She had learned to position herself near exits. What she had not learned was how to stop him. "Yes, sir," Aria said. She turned and walked toward the kitchen's main corridor, toward Section C, where the evening's guests were settling into their expensive leather chairs and opening menus that did not list prices because the assumption was that people who came here could afford whatever they wanted. What she did not know, as she walked through those kitchen doors, was that someone was watching her. Someone had been watching her for longer than she realized. Someone had been orchestrating her entire life into a specific pattern, like a chess player moving pieces across a board, and that night, that precise November night when she walked into Section C, the game would reach a critical moment. But that moment was still hours away. First came the rain. The November rain hammered against the loading dock doors of the Meridian Hotel like gunfire, each drop striking the industrial glass with a sound like breaking glass against concrete. Aria's hands trembled as she scrubbed the massive stockpot, her fingers raw and wrinkled from 16 hours submerged in scalding water. The kitchen exhaled around her, the hiss of steam from the dishwashing station, the low murmur of line cooks plating dishes for the private dining sections, the rhythmic chopping of knives on cutting boards. None of it masked the sound of Marcus Webb's voice as he screamed at her from across the kitchen. "You think you can take breaks whenever you feel like it?" His face had gone purple, the vein in his temple pulsing like a second heartbeat. Marcus Webb was 47, with thinning blonde hair he combed over his scalp, small eyes that held the cruelty of someone who enjoyed power only over people weaker than himself, and a smell like cheap cologne mixed with sweat. His manager's uniform, black slacks, white shirt, the hotel's burgundy vest, hung on him like a costume. "I saw you. 15 minutes in the bathroom. I'm docking your pay." Aria did not look up from the pot. "I was sick. I needed." "I don't care what you needed. You're lucky I don't fire you right now." He leaned closer, and she could feel the heat of his breath on her neck, could smell the coffee on his tongue. His hand reached toward her waist, fingers curling like a spider. "Lucky I'm being generous with you." She stepped sideways, a movement so practiced it felt like muscle memory, and his hand closed on empty air. His jaw clenched. He walked away, muttering about worthless staff, about how she should be grateful to have any job at all. She was grateful. That was the terrible truth that kept her awake at night. She was grateful to work 60-hour weeks for tips that Marcus stole, grateful to eat the scraps left on customers' plates, grateful to sleep in a shelter with her son Oliver in borrowed clothes while the rain drummed on the roof and she counted the days until the loan sharks arrived. 12 days. That was all she had left. The kitchen doors burst open. 3 men in black coats entered through the service entrance, water streaming off their shoulders, their eyes carrying the flat, purposeful quality of people trained to hurt. Between them, they dragged a teenage girl, no older than 16, with dark hair plastered to her face, wearing a soaked school uniform. Her eyes were unfocused, moving independently of each other in the way that meant she could not see. A white cane clattered to the tile floor, skidding across the kitchen toward the walk-in freezer. One of the men twisted her hair around his fist, pulling her head back until her throat stretched like a pale line of vulnerability. "Your brother thinks he can move product through our territory." His voice was a growl. "We send him a message. A message he understands." The kitchen staff scattered like roaches when the lights came on. The sous chef vanished behind the walk-in freezer door. A prep cook bolted toward the back stairs. Within 5 seconds, the kitchen was empty except for Aria, who stood frozen at the pot station, her hand still submerged in grey water. The blind girl made a sound, not quite a word, something between a gasp and a prayer. Aria moved without thinking. She pulled her hands from the water, reached for the nearest thing, a stainless steel ladle, utterly useless as a weapon, and stepped directly in front of the girl. The 3 men stopped, as if they could not quite process what they were seeing. A woman in a stained uniform, 5'4", thin from months of eating once a day, soaking wet from the kitchen steam, putting herself between them and their target. "You want to hurt a blind girl?" Aria's voice was quiet, but it carried through the kitchen like a blade through silk. "Then you go through me first." The man holding the girl's hair laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "Move," he said. "Unless you want to be messier than she is." Aria did not move. Her hand shook, but her voice stayed steady. "I have already lost everything. My husband. My home. Every dollar I ever saved. You can shoot me. You can beat me unconscious. I am not moving." The second man raised his gun. The third man stepped forward, reaching for her with a hand that looked like it had broken bones more times than she had days left to live. Then a voice cut through the kitchen like a blade wrapped in ice. "Lower your weapons." Nico Russo emerged from the shadows near the industrial ovens, where he had been meeting with Margaret Harrington about territory agreements for the hotel's back rooms. He was 6'2", broad-shouldered in a dark suit that cost more than Aria made in a year, with black hair swept back from a forehead marked by a scar that ran from the corner of his left eye to his jawline, a souvenir from the night his father died. That scar had been white for the first 5 years, but time had deepened it to a thin, angry red. His eyes were storm gray, and they held the quality of someone who had watched people die and felt nothing except the efficiency of the moment. Tony and Nino appeared beside him like ghosts, their guns already drawn, their expressions utterly flat. The 3 men with the girl recognized Nico Russo instantly. Recognition moved through their bodies like electricity. One of them released the girl's hair as if it had turned into fire. Nico walked toward them without hurrying, each footstep deliberate, each movement controlled. He did not raise his voice. "I said lower your weapons." They lowered their weapons. "Leave the girl. Leave the kitchen. Get in your car and drive to the Everglades. You have 1 hour to disappear from Miami before I send people to collect you." He paused. His eyes moved to the man who had held the gun. "The last person who threatened someone under my protection spent 2 weeks in a meat locker before his family got him back. He was not recognizable. They used dental records." Nico tilted his head slightly. "Do you understand?" They understood. They moved like animals fleeing a fire, abandoning the girl, scrambling toward the kitchen doors, disappearing into the November rain. Then Nico Russo stared at Aria with an expression that frightened his own men. For 15 years, Tony and Nino had worked for him. For 15 years, they had watched him negotiate with business partners, interrogate enemies, stand over bleeding bodies with the emotional distance of someone reviewing a ledger. They had never seen his expression change. They had never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at Aria Voss in that moment, like he was seeing something he thought had died 15 years ago, buried in the same grave as his father. "Who are you?" His voice was different. Quieter. Like thunder that had learned to whisper. Aria's hands were shaking so badly she could barely speak. "Nobody," she whispered. "I am nobody." But what neither of them knew was that someone had been watching through a hidden camera in the kitchen's upper corner, someone who controlled those three men like a puppeteer controls strings, someone whose entire plan depended on keeping Aria Voss broken and visible only when convenient. That someone was already calculating the next move, already rearranging the pieces on the board. The rain continued to fall outside, each drop striking the windows like a countdown. 20 minutes later, the three men were secured in black SUVs that would carry them toward the swamp and anonymity. Nico sat across from Aria in the hotel manager's office, the walls lined with diplomas and pictures of smiling hotel guests. His sister Elena, the blind girl, sat beside Aria, holding her hand as if she were the anchor to the real world. "You saved my sister," Nico said. His hands rested on the desk, unmoving. "Why?" "I don't know." Aria pulled her hand away from Elena, suddenly aware of how wet she was, how she smelled like industrial dishwashing solution and poverty. "I need to finish my shift. Marcus will fire me if I don't." "You will not work another shift for Marcus Webb," Nico said. His voice was still quiet, but it carried a finality like a coffin lid closing. "Tell me what you need." "I can't." Aria stood, moving toward the door. "I can't accept help from someone like you. I need to work. I need to earn money. I need," her voice broke. "I need my son to have somewhere safe to sleep." Nico leaned forward. "Tell me what you need." Aria turned back, and for a moment she was just a woman at the end of her endurance, every wall she had built collapsing like a building hit by a wrecking ball. $200,000 in 12 days, or loan sharks will come for my son. A manager who stops stealing my tips and bruising my ribs. A time machine to go back and stop my husband from borrowing money from the wrong people. You cannot help me. I am nobody. You stood between armed men and my sister, Nico said. You are not nobody. Outside, the rain fell like a prophecy, and neither of them knew that in the walls around them, listening devices were recording every word, sending the conversation directly to Margaret Harrington, who smiled at her phone screen and began making calls to ensure that Aria Voss would be even more trapped, even more desperate, and infinitely more useful for the darkness she had planned. The fireplace crackled, flames dancing against stone, but the warmth could not reach Oliver's body anymore. Aria knelt beside the guest room bed at Nico's mountain lodge, her hand trembling as she held her son's small fingers. 3 feet of snow buried the roads outside. The November blizzard had trapped them here, 2 hours north of Miami, where she had agreed to spend Thanksgiving because Oliver deserved one day without fear, one day where the walls did not close in. His lips were turning blue. The fever had started yesterday at 103 degrees. By this morning it had climbed to 104.2. His asthma, which had always been manageable with the inhaler she stretched to last 3 months instead of 1, had become something else entirely. Each breath was a struggle. Each exhale came as a shallow wheeze, like the wind trying to escape a broken door. Aria pressed her forehead against their joined hands. She thought about the child's drawing still in her pocket, worn soft from being folded and unfolded 1,000 times. A family holding hands under a yellow sun. 4 figures, all together, all safe. Her husband had promised her that. He had sworn on their lives that everything would be okay, that his debts would be manageable, that they would figure it out together. He had left her with $2 and a corpse. She thought about Marcus Webb's hands on her ribs, the bruising he left that looked like fingerprints of a ghost. She thought about Margaret Harrington's smile, the precise cruelty of a woman who orchestrated suffering the way other people plan dinner parties. She thought about the lake behind this lodge, frozen solid now under the snow. How easy it would be to walk out into the storm and simply not come back. If Oliver died, there would be nothing left. No reason to keep fighting. No point to the struggle. Oliver's fingers twitched. Just once. Barely a movement. But his hand squeezed hers with the smallest fraction of pressure. Her husband's voice came back to her then, a memory so vivid she could smell the coffee on his breath, could feel the warmth of his arm around her shoulders on a morning before everything broke. "You are the strongest person I know," he had said. "Promise me you will never give up. Promise me that when I am gone, you will keep fighting. For Oliver. For yourself. Promise me." Aria's breath came back. Her lungs expanded. Her vision cleared. She stumbled into the hallway screaming for help. Her voice shattered the silence like glass dropped on tile. She screamed until her throat burned, until her voice became something raw and animal and unstoppable. Nico appeared in the corridor before she finished the third scream. He was still in the black shirt he had worn yesterday, sleeves rolled, the scar that ran from his eye to his cheekbone catching the hallway light like a blade. His eyes, those storm-grey eyes that had watched rivals fall and enemies beg, went wide with a fear that no amount of power could command away. "His fever," Aria gasped. "His breathing. We need a hospital. We need to leave now. We need." "The roads are impassable," Nico said. His voice held no inflection, but she heard the lie in it, the thing he was not saying. 40 minutes in clear weather. In this storm, we cannot reach the base of the mountain. Then we call the helicopter. You have money. You have people. Call them. Call someone. He is dying. She grabbed his shirt, her fingers digging into the fabric. He is dying and I am going to lose him and I will not. Nico caught her face between his hands with a gentleness that broke something open in her chest. "Listen to me. You are not alone in this. I am here. Do you understand? I am here." Tony and Nino appeared at the stairwell behind him, their suits looking out of place in this sprawling lodge that belonged to a different world entirely. They had brought the doctor from the nearest town, a woman in her 60s named Dr. Reeves who moved with efficient precision, who took Oliver's temperature and listened to his lungs and looked at Aria with the kind of compassion that meant she knew exactly how bad this was. "Pneumonia," Dr. Reeves said. "Secondary infection from the asthma. I can give him oxygen, antibiotics, antipyretics, but if his oxygen saturation drops below 88%, he needs hospital-grade care." "The blizzard." "I know about the blizzard," Nico said. His jaw had gone tight, the scar deepening with shadow. "What does he need?" "Constant monitoring. For fluids. Possibly intubation if his lungs deteriorate further." Nico turned away. Aria heard him on the phone, heard names like Dr. Castellano and the Coast Guard and the National Guard, heard the particular cadence of a man accustomed to moving mountains with words. She heard the word no repeated back to him. The storm was too severe. The nearest helicopter was grounded. No one was flying anywhere until the weather cleared. For the first time in 15 years, Tony would later tell the story, he saw Nico Russo rendered helpless by something money could not fix. The man who had built an empire on vengeance, who had systematized power the way other men systematized prayer, fell to his knees beside Oliver's bed. Tony watched from the doorway. Nino stood beside him, both men turned to stone. Nico's head bowed. His lips moved. He was praying. Aria had never seen anything like it. This man, this dangerous, controlled, lethal man, was asking God for his son's life as if he had any right to make that bargain, as if heaven would negotiate with someone who had ordered men into the ground. She looked at him kneeling there in the firelight and saw herself reflected back. Two people who refused to surrender. Two people backed into the corner with nowhere left to run except forward, through the fire if necessary, burning everything else away. "I need your satellite phone," Aria said. Her voice was steady now. The panic had crystallized into something sharper, something that cut through the darkness like intention. Call the volunteer paramedics in town. I need to talk to them. I need to know what we can do here. Nico's head came up. He understood what she was asking. She was asking him to trust her with her son's life. She was asking him to step back and let her take the wheel. He handed her the phone without a word. The paramedic on the line was a man named Derek, who ran a small volunteer service out of a converted warehouse near the valley. He had treated asthma emergencies before. He had kept people alive during times when the hospital was hours away. Aria held Oliver's small head in her lap while Derek walked her through each step. Cool compresses. Positioning. How to check oxygen saturation using a pulse oximeter that Nico had a member of the household retrieve from the first aid station. When Oliver's numbers began to drop, Derek stayed on the line. His voice remained calm, practical, an anchor in the storm. Nebulized medications. Breathing techniques. Aria held Oliver upright, taught him to breathe in patterns, counting out loud in her mother's voice, the one that had soothed him through every fear of his young life. 1, 2, 3, breathe. 1, 2, 3, breathe. Behind her, Nico held the phone to his ear, his hand on Oliver's small back, following every instruction Aria gave with a precision that suggested he had spent his entire life taking orders from her. When she said turn him slightly left, he turned him. When she said we need more oxygen, he adjusted the flow. When Oliver whimpered and asked if he was going to die, Aria leaned close and whispered, "No, my love. You are not. I will not allow it." The blizzard raged through the night. The wind howled like something caged and desperate. The snow accumulated against the windows until the world outside became white static, reality erased. Aria did not sleep. She sat beside Oliver's bed, monitoring his breathing, counting the risings and fallings of his small chest. Every descent into lower oxygen numbers sent a spike of ice through her veins. Every recovery felt like a reprieve from a death sentence. Nico did not leave the room either. He sat in the chair by the fire, still and quiet, watching a child he had no claim to fight for breath with the ferocity of a man who had spent his whole life unable to save the people he loved. When dawn broke, the snow had finally stopped. The roads were still impassable, but the helicopter had a narrow window. For hours. Maybe 5. The pilot could attempt it if the passenger was critical. Dr. Reeves examined Oliver at dawn. His oxygen saturation had stabilized at 91%. His fever had dropped to 101. He was still sick, still fragile, but he was holding. "If he stays stable, the hospital can wait," she said. "But if he crashes again?" "He will not crash," Aria said. She was not asking. She was informing the universe of a fact. The helicopter came at 9 a.m. Oliver was stable enough to travel. Aria rode with him, her hand in his the entire way, while Nico remained at the lodge. By afternoon, Oliver was admitted to Miami General with pneumonia that required 5 days of antibiotics and constant monitoring, but a pneumonia that was treatable, survivable, beatable. When Aria finally left his hospital room for coffee and to shower, she received a text from Tony. 3 simple words, "It is done." She did not need to ask what was done. She knew. The FBI raid on the Ocean View Grand happened at dawn the next morning. Aria saw the news coverage in Oliver's hospital room, the footage captured on the security cameras that Nico's people had enhanced and edited. 12 agents in tactical gear flooded Marcus Webb's office on the administrative level. They moved with the precision of men who had done this 1,000 times, who knew exactly what they would find because they had been told exactly where to look. Marcus was at his desk, reviewing the schedule for the week, when they arrived. He looked small in that moment, Aria thought. Smaller than he had ever looked when he was towering over her during shifts, his hands moving where they should not, his voice dripping with threats about the tips she had failed to earn, the mistakes she had made, the reasons he might have to let her go. The lead agent, a woman with grey streaking her dark hair, placed the warrant on his desk. She read him his rights with the kind of weariness that suggested she had read rights to men like Marcus Webb 1,000 times before. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. They cuffed him while he was still sitting, the metal cutting into the wrists that had touched Aria without permission for 3 years. For years of stolen tips, the agent said. $47,000 documented in meticulous detail by accountants who had learned to follow money the way bloodhounds follow scent. 18 women harassed. Documented threats. And the money laundering charges. The connection to Margaret Harrington. The connection to rivals who used the hotel as a front. When they dragged him out through the lobby, the women he had harassed were waiting. The housekeeping staff. The servers. The bartender whose shift he had cut when she reported him to corporate. They watched in silence as he was led away, trembling like a cornered animal, his expensive slacks and designer shoes suddenly looking like the costume of a man who had been playing at power all along. Federal prison. 40 years. No possibility of parole. That same morning, as the sun burned off the frost on the Miami shoreline, FBI agents arrived at Margaret Harrington's waterfront estate. She was hosting a charity brunch, the kind of affair where society women gathered in gardens to discuss philanthropy while the actual money moved through their hands like blood through veins, filtered and cleaned and made pure. Margaret answered the door in a dress that cost more than Aria's annual salary. $1,000. Maybe more. Cream-colored, fitted perfectly, the kind of garment that only made sense if you had never wondered if you could afford to eat. The diamonds at her throat caught the morning light and threw it back like accusations. The lead agent was the same woman from the Ocean View Grand. She seemed to enjoy this part of her job, Aria thought, watching the news coverage as Oliver slept fitfully beside her in the hospital bed. The moment when powerful people realized that power had been an illusion all along. Margaret Harrington, you are under arrest for money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy, and tax evasion. The society women gasped. Margaret's face went white, then red, then a shade somewhere between fury and disbelief. The agent cuffed her in front of them all, the diamond necklace glinting as Margaret's hands were pulled behind her back. 5 years of financial records emerged in the media coverage over the next hours. Margaret had laundered millions through the hotel, cleaning money for a rival family, the same family whose men had tried to hurt Elena Russo in that kitchen on a November night that felt like it had happened in a different lifetime. The same family Nico had been systematically destroying since his father's murder 15 years ago. Margaret's assets were frozen. Her bank account seized. The society women who had breakfasted with her that morning turned away when their phones buzzed with the news. Her reputation was not just damaged. It was annihilated. Erased. Rendered invisible the way she had rendered Aria invisible for 3 years, the way she had orchestrated a poor widow's desperation for her own profit. Federal prison. 50 years. Total financial ruin. Too quick, too easy, too merciful, Nico might have said. But he ensured she would live long enough to watch everything she had built crumble to ash, to understand that invisible people sometimes carried the greatest power of all. The office was silent except for the soft hum of the computer screen, the glow casting Nico Russo's face in shades of blue and grey. He sat motionless in his leather chair, one hand wrapped around a glass of whiskey he had not touched, watching footage from 6 months ago play on repeat. The hotel kitchen. The armed men. The moment a woman with desperate eyes and nothing left to lose stepped between them and his sister Elena. He had watched this clip 47 times. Maybe more. He could not stop. The office door opened without a knock. Aria Voss stood in the frame wearing a navy blazer and slacks she had bought with her own money, her dark hair pulled back, her posture carrying a confidence that had not existed 6 months ago when she flinched at every shadow. She was no longer invisible. She had become indispensable. "You're watching it again," she said. Not a question. Nico did not look away from the screen. Yes. Aria moved across the marble floor, her footsteps steady, purposeful, so different from the shuffling exhaustion of a woman working double shifts for tips that cruel men stole. She sat beside him in the leather chair reserved for business associates and rivals, though she had become neither. She had become something no one in this office could quite name. Why? She asked softly. Because before that night, I thought courage was something only people like me possessed. His voice came out like gravel, rough from disuse of gentleness. People who had nothing left to lose. People who had already buried everyone they loved and had nothing but vengeance left to hold on to. On the screen, the woman who would save his sister moved toward the men. Small. Worn. Terrified. But you had everything to lose, Nico continued, finally turning to look at her directly. Your son. Your job. Your life. Your $2 and that drawing Oliver made. And you still did not move. You stood there like you were made of something stronger than fear. Aria's breath caught. In 6 months, he had never spoken about that moment. He had acted on it, destroyed the men who tried to hurt Elena, paid her debts, saved Oliver's life in the hospital, but he had never named the thing that broke open in him when he watched a widow become a warrior. You paid my debts, Aria said quietly. $200,000. You destroyed the people who hurt me. You saved my son's life when he was burning with fever and I thought I was going to lose him. You saved my sister when my own men froze like statues. Nico's eyes were storm-dark and unreadable. Tony and Nino stood there paralyzed, and you moved. You chose to be the one thing they needed most. You saved my humanity, Aria Voss. I thought I had buried it with my father in the ground 15 years ago, but you dragged it back into the light whether I wanted it or not. She took his hand. His fingers were warm, the skin rough from years of holding power and weapons and the weight of an empire. Her own hand was smaller, marked with calluses that would never fully fade, scars of survival. Then maybe we do not need to keep score, she said. Maybe we can be even. Not debtor and savior. Just two people who were dying and found each other in the dark. Nico's grip tightened. Just two people. Before Aria could answer, the office door burst open. Oliver ran in at full speed, his new shoes, bought with legitimate money now, not borrowed from a charity, slapping against the marble. Elena was behind him, her white cane tapping a rhythm against the floor, her face bright with laughter. The blind girl moved through the space like she owned it, guided by sound and memory and the fact that Nico had installed every safety feature possible after the first time she visited. Nico, guess what Elena taught me? Oliver skidded to a stop in front of the desk, breathless. She taught me how to read her cane by touch, and she says when I'm older she'll teach me sign language even though I can hear because languages are power and she said everyone should have power. Elena reached them and found the back of Nico's chair with one hand, still smiling. He asked me why I preferred touch to sound sometimes, and I told him that sometimes the world is too loud and your hands remember things your ears forget. Nico looked at his sister, then at the boy, then at the woman beside him. Something in his chest shifted, a sound like ice breaking in spring, like a door closing on winter. He smiled. A real smile. The kind that made his face look different, younger, less carved from stone. Tony and Nino, who had been standing in the corner of the office doing something that looked like reading emails but was actually surveillance of their boss's emotional state, exchanged a look. In 15 years of working for Nico Russo, they had never seen him smile like that. Not once. Not even when he destroyed his first rival or claimed the Russo territory or won the city's loyalty through fear and strategy. Oliver climbed into Nico's lap without hesitation, the kind of trust that only children give freely, and pointed at the computer screen. That's the kitchen where you saved Elena, right? Mama told me about it 1,000,000 times. He called her Mama now. It had taken 3 months before Oliver said the word without stuttering, before Aria could hear it without her eyes filling with tears. She had been alone with her son for so long, carrying all the weight, all the decisions, all the terror. Now he had a mother and a sister and a man who read him bedtime stories in Italian and taught him about loyalty and survival and the code that made the darkness bearable. That's the kitchen, Nico said, his voice steady and low. And your mother is the bravest person I have ever known. Elena found Aria's shoulder and squeezed it. He watches that footage at least once a day. Tony thinks he has watched it over 200 times. 312, Nino corrected from the corner, not looking up from his phone. Aria felt something bloom in her chest like a flower breaking through concrete. This man. This powerful, dangerous, ice-cold man who had buried his capacity for softness 15 years ago had been watching her choose courage over and over again, studying the moment she became more than invisible. She took his free hand while his other rested on Oliver's head. The boy was already drowsy, the way children get in safe places where they do not have to be afraid. Elena sat on the arm of the chair, her cane resting against her leg, completely at ease in a space that had been built on fear and power and blood. "I love you," Aria said simply. Not as a question. Not as a debt to be repaid. Just a fact, stated in the presence of witnesses. Nico turned to her, and for a moment the mask slipped entirely. There was the scarred boy who watched his father die. There was the man who chose vengeance over grief. There was the emptiness he had carried for so long it felt like the only truth he had left. And there, underneath it all, was the person he might have been if loss had not remade him. "Then let us build something that lasts," he said. "Not an empire. Not a legacy of fear. Just a family. The kind I thought was only possible in other people's lives." The office fell silent again, but it was a different silence now. Not the silence of a man alone with his ghosts. The silence of people choosing to stay. 6 months later, Aria stood in the Ocean View Grand's kitchen, in the exact spot where everything changed. The white cane from that night rested on the stainless steel counter beside her, Elena's cane, dropped in terror and retrieved in courage. She ran her fingers across it and felt the weight of what it meant. The kitchen had new staff now, younger workers who would never know about Marcus Webb or his cruelty, who would never flinch when they heard his name because he was already erased. Federal prison. 40 years. He would age in a cell, his beauty fading, his power becoming nothing but a memory of what he had stolen. Margaret Harrington's fate had been worse in some ways. The federal agents had come during breakfast with the society women, right in front of everyone who mattered in her world. The diamonds at her throat had caught the morning light like accusations. The charges had been precise and devastating. Money laundering. Racketeering. Conspiracy. Tax evasion. 50 years in federal prison. Every asset frozen. Every account seized. The society women who had called her friend turned away the moment the news hit their phones. She had been rendered invisible the way she had rendered Aria invisible for 3 years. Maria Rodriguez was the general manager now, one of the women Marcus had harassed, given power and salary and the authority to create a kitchen where people could work without terror. The sous chef who had hidden behind the freezer during that night now made eye contact with Aria when she passed through. He still apologized, though she had forgiven him months ago. Sometimes, Aria said, her voice carrying through the quiet kitchen like a prayer, "I wonder what would have happened if I had looked away that night. If I had pretended not to see Elena's fear, if I had chosen my job over a stranger's sister, if I had let the invisible woman stay invisible." She picked up the white cane carefully, respectfully, like it was a relic of something sacred. "I thought I was nobody," she continued. "A widow with $2 in her pocket and a foreclosure notice in my bag and a son sleeping in borrowed clothes. I thought the powerful lived in a different world, one where people like me did not matter. Where our choices were insignificant, our courage meaningless." She closed her eyes and could see it all happening again. The armed men. Elena's blindness making her vulnerable in ways that made Aria's heart break. The moment she decided that someone had to stand up, even if that someone was nobody. Especially if that someone was nobody. But the truth is simpler and harder than that. Aria set the cane back down. We all have moments when we can choose to look away or step forward. When we can choose to protect the powerful or defend the powerless. When we can stay invisible or become the light that makes others able to see. She walked toward the door, toward the lobby where Nico was waiting, where Oliver was drawing new pictures in his sketchbook, pictures that now always included four figures holding hands, a family remade from ashes and desperation and the choice to love when love seemed impossible. Those moments define us more than our bank accounts or our titles or our empires ever will, she said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had lived on both sides of invisible. The light from the kitchen windows caught her face and showed a woman transformed. Not rich in money, though that too, now, but rich in something deeper. Rich in the knowledge that she had mattered when it counted. Rich in the love of a man who had learned tenderness from watching her choose courage. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light, Nico said, and she had not realized he was standing in the doorway. And sometimes it takes someone with nothing to show someone with everything what actually matters. He crossed the kitchen in measured steps and pulled her close, right there in the space where it all began, while Oliver peered around the corner and Elena waited in the lobby, patient and smiling, already part of a family that had learned to hold each other through the dark. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we bring you stories like this every single day, stories about courage, redemption, and the power of standing up when everyone else looks away. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that they are not invisible, that their choices matter, that their courage can change everything. Drop a comment telling us about a time you stood up for someone who needed it. We read every single one, and your words matter to us. New story drops tomorrow, and you will not want to miss it. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace and happiness. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video.